So let's continue talking about Argentina's economy today. I was planning to talk about 5 indicators that are showing that Argentina's economy is actually recovering. However, I decided that today I will only talk about what's happening regarding inflation. In my last video, I talked about why I think people have a very short memory regarding Argentina. My point was that people seem to have forgotten that Argentina's economy was already in shambles before Milei took office. And many people actually think Argentina's economy is sinking. So that's why I decided to make a video, or more than one video, showing why I believe that Argentina's economy is actually recovering, and why I believe Argentina could become one of the strongest economies in the world over the coming decades, if the economic reforms we are seeing continue. Okay, so let's talk about Argentina's inflation. So, as we can see here, inflation in Argentina closed 2023 at 211%. 211%. Now, where are we today? So, in 2026, inflation is expected to close at 29%. So, inflation dropped from 211% to only 29%. That's a major victory, okay? That's a major victory. That's out of discussion, right? So Milei was indeed able to reduce inflation by a lot. I mean, that's a miracle. Now, how did he do this? Okay, let's cover that. However, I also want to show another chart that I also think is another very big achievement of Milei's administration, okay, which is this chart here. Where is it? Where is it? Here. Accumulated primary fiscal result. And I promise you that you will understand why this is important, okay? So accumulated primary fiscal result. So as you can see here, this darker blue represents 2022, right? As we can see, in 2022, Argentina delivered a deficit, a primary deficit of 2% of GDP, and the same thing happened in 2023. Actually, 2023 was worse, with Argentina posting a deficit of 2.7% of GDP. After Milei took office, though, Argentina started to deliver surpluses. Now, why is that important? People are struggling, and you are talking about surpluses. That's simply too abstract, right? Nope. The government's deficit and the government surplus has everything to do with inflation. Now, how is that so? You see, what is inflation after all? People usually think that inflation is when overall prices rise. However, inflation is not exactly about that. Prices can rise because of a pandemic, because of supply chain disruptions, because of war. However, that's not inflation. Inflation is when the monetary base expands, gets bigger, is when the government creates more money, inflating the monetary base, the amount of money that circulates through the economy. So here's something very important. Inflation is always caused by the government, because if inflation is when the monetary base inflates, increases, only the government can do that, right? So that's inflation. It's the inflation of the monetary base. Now, why does that happen? Why does inflation happen? That's a very important question. So inflation happens because the government has been operating in deficit mode, has been posting deficits. So since the government is posting deficits, since the government is spending more than it collects, it has to cover for the deficit somehow. So for that, it can either raise taxes, it can also take on debt. Argentina was doing that. Argentina has a lot of debt. However, if you do that for a long period of time, you will get to a point where your deficit is so big that the only option left to you is pretty much to print money, which was exactly what Argentina was doing. You see, Argentina's economy was such in a terrible economic shape that its printing facilities were already working at full capacity. We're already operating 24/7. So Argentina got to a point where it started importing banknotes from Brazil, from Europe, right? Because it was simply printing tons of money, right? So that's what created inflation. That's what ended up destroying Argentina's economy. Now, one very important thing for us to notice here is that inflation is actually the symptom of public deficit. Okay? Inflation is the symptom of public deficit because inflation only happens because the government needs to print money to cover the deficit. So if you eliminate the deficit, you won't need to print money anymore, right? So that's what Milei has done. He cut government spending with his chainsaw. I think that's the word, chainsaw. And that's how the money printing stopped. And as a consequence, that's how inflation dropped. So, if on one hand, I think that people have a very short memory because they seem to have forgotten that Argentina was in such a terrible economic shape. On the other hand, I also think that most people are not recognizing the huge achievements Milei has already delivered. For example, Milei was able to bring down inflation from 200% to only 30%. Okay? That's crazy. That was a miracle. And that was only possible because he cut government spending, because he started delivering fiscal surpluses. And that was another major achievement by Milei's administration. And well, with that, as a consequence, you have other victories as well. For example, Argentina's interest rate went from 126% to the current 29%. Another fucking miracle, you know? So I don't think people are recognizing that, how amazing this is. What a huge achievement this is, man. And many people might say that's too abstract. Oh, the Milei delivered surpluses, the inflation rate went down, interest rates also went down. So what? People are still struggling. Yeah, but you know, it's about building the foundations for your economy, for your country's economy to grow sustainably, you know? And that's how it all starts, right? That's how it all starts. Because with lower interest rates, first, with a lower inflation rate, it becomes easier to bring down interest rate, right? With much lower interest rates, it becomes much easier for people to invest. That starts generating jobs, and so on. So yeah, that's why I will say here again that I think Milei is building the foundations so Argentina can become one of the strongest economies over the coming decades. That's it for today, and see you next time.